Alright, so here's your situation. This is an engine, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So here's our transmission. And this one has actually the clutch already bolted up. And I'm going to leave it bolted up. So at least you're familiar, right? The clutch plate is in between the pressure plate and the flywheel. So those are the friction surfaces. Now take that and apply it over here. Here's your clutch disc. You guys can see the clutch disc splines on the input shaft.
Yeah.
So those splines should be clean, pretty loose. Now here's your pressure plate, aka the cover. When that bolts up, under normal circumstances, it squeezes the clutch really hard into the flywheel, right? But our clutch release mechanism is about to be brought into the mix here. So I'm not going to hold this for long, but here I've got our clutch release cylinder. We call it the slave cylinder if you want to be politically incorrect. But the engineer named it, so you'd be mad at them. So this release cylinder is going to actually actuate this fork. See what I'm saying? Actuate the fork. Look what's on the fork. What's this? Release bearing, aka the throttle bearing. So just for a second, if I hold this over here like this, you can see I'd actually have to disassemble really quick. Which I can do. Got it. Back. Okay. Now that's back on. So if we want to release the fork, I got it. Sit on there. Sit on there. Sit on there. No, it's okay. If I need assistance, I'll call somebody. So, if we want to release the clutch, see what happens. We're going to push on the pedal. Pedal's going to push on the fluid. Fluid is going to push on that release cylinder, and the release cylinder is going to cause this motion. It's literally going to push toward that actual pressure plate. Kind of backwards of what you pictured, huh? The thing is, when it pushes toward the pressure plate, what happens is, these springs actually are on a hinge. They pivot down here, kind of like a seesaw. So you're going to push the springs this way, but because they're mounted on a pivot here, they're actually going to cause this friction surface to recess this way. You push on these right here. If I have the juice, they're pretty hard. If I push these in, this friction surface will actually fall away in this direction. Now, if I pop this back together, what's that going to cause this clutch to do if the flywheel's right here?
Kind of disengage.
Yeah, it's gonna give it some space in there. So there might not be a whole lot of clearance, but there will be enough where it's gonna disengage the clutch. So when your pedal is up, no hydraulic action is occurring, this clutch is engaged, sandwiched. You push the pedal down, fluid, fork, pushes in on the release bearing, and then it's gonna release it. So now, you understand that, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take this out, because this is the janky part that wants to fall. I'll put the clutch disc back in because I can. Now, for the noises, here's the release bearing. Release bearing's back here. The clutch fork kind of grabs it. If you're sitting there right now with the clutch pedal up, the clutch is engaged. The actual clutch is engaged. The clutch pedal's up, right?
Yeah.
That means there's no force on this fork, right? So what's this release bearing doing? It's kind of hanging out. Sometimes if the release bearings have a little looseness, especially when they're brand new, that's when you might hear a little bit of a rattle, because this stuff is just sitting here loose. What happens when you just start to put a little pedal pressure on it? It starts to push, and if there's a problem with that bearing will start to work. If you increase the pressure and the noise gets worse, let's say it's kind of like, at first it might be like, chip, 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 and then if you put more pressure on it, you can make it go. If you can change, you like those sound effects. If you can change the sound with your pedal pressure, it's because it's changing the force applied to this release bearing. See what I'm saying? So you could literally, you could do it with your foot or your hand, and you're kind of listening and you're knowing what you're putting a load on and taking a load off. That's the best way that I would say to diagnose. Other people would tell you, like you heard in the study video, you know, if you're in gear and you're not in gear and you're whatever, but I just think that muddies the waters. So I'm going to take the release bearing out. Release bearings come in different styles. A lot of times there's a little clip and it's going to clip it to the release fork. This release bearing actually feels pretty crappy. So if you really wanted to know when you take it out, try to turn it. This one, it turns, but at first didn't want to. The other thing is, this release bearing is actually going to slide on a bearing retainer. So I don't have a bearing retainer on here, but there's like a sleeve that it has to slide on. That's another thing we need to clean up and make sure it can move freely. That's going to help. So the other bearing noise that's common, we've got a pilot bearing right here. This is actually a bearing, not a bushing. It can be a bearing or a bushing. That's going to sit right here, right on the input shaft, they call it the pilot. So if it's sitting right there, I want to think about something. Let's say we're in that same situation. Our clutch pedal is released, the engine is turning. I want you to remember this pilot lands in the back of the crankshaft. So if your clutch pedal is up, your clutch is engaged, your engine RPM is 1,000, what's your input speed? It's 1,000. Because think about it. If the clutch is engaged, that basically means, look, the clutch grabs the splines. So if the clutch is being squeezed to the flywheel, they're turning together. What's this pilot bearing or bushing doing? It's just going along for the ride. It's literally the outside of it is going to be pressed into the crankshaft or into the flywheel. And then the inside of it is basically riding on the input shaft, but they're both turning together, so the bearing could be blown up.
Oh no.
This bearing now is missing rollers. If that bearing is shot, literally, it's missing rollers now. If clutch pedal is up, the clutch is engaged, it's turning together. Who cares if these rollers are missing? It doesn't matter, they're turning together. Here's where the problem comes in. You depress the clutch pedal. Now your clutch is disengaged, right? Because the fork and the fluid and all that. Now, engine RPM is 1,000. What's your input shaft speed? 0. It's stopped, literally. This clutch disc comes away from the flywheel, and this thing it was spinning, right, and it slowly comes to a stop. And as it's coming to a stop, the bearing's doing more and more and more and more work. And once this is at 1,000 and this is fully stopped at 0, you might get a wah, or if it's a bushing and it's dry because it didn't get lubed because it's a sloppy tag, chip, 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 or you might get some noise. It's hard to really say exactly what the noise will be, but you can manipulate the different conditions to tell when the noise comes in. So don't think that like this is a chirping and this is a growling. They could both be any noise. But this would make noise with pedal pressure, and this would make noise with a speed difference between engine and transmission. It's the #1 way that you're going to really want to understand. Simone!
If you have it at a higher RPM, will it make a noise?
You can change the noise. Yeah, exactly. Because if you think about it, you're getting more and more speed differential. This is stopped, and if this speeds up, you might hear a little bit of change, stuff like that. Now, there's one more bearing we're worried about. This right here is the transmission input shaft. This one's already installed. So let's think about this. Right now, our clutch pedal is still down. The clutch is disengaged. So this is not turning, right?
Right.
So would this bearing make any noise? No. How can we make this bearing potentially make noise?
When it engages the clutch?
Yeah, so basically anytime we let the clutch pedal up and engages the clutch, it's going to make noise. And that's probably the #1 thing. This bearing is not going to change with pedal pressure. It's basically going to be clutch pedal up with the clutch engaged, but sound more like it has to do with speed. So like, as soon as you let the clutch pedal up and this transmission starts turning, and this one, I don't have all the shift rails, but we can make neutral happen right here. So if it were in neutral, maybe it would have less of a noise, but it would probably have, it would probably make quite a bit of noise in neutral if we had the input shaft turning. Now if we were to put it in gear, well look, it still turns. But this is the thing, if you're in neutral, look what's turning. Really just that input bearing. So it's kind of like in neutral, we wouldn't be turning the output shaft. So if it's an input shaft bearing, it's really going to be at engine speed with the clutch engaged. Gotta love it. Now let's say it was an output shaft bearing. How can we make the output shaft bearing make noise? We have to have it in gear. So if we want it first, that's first. Now look, this bearing would make some noise. How could we get this bearing to make more noise? Go faster, and maybe we're at red line in first, maybe we go to second. This noise is going to be consistent with the drive shaft speed, which is consistent with the vehicle speed. This one wouldn't change so much with RPM. This one, output shaft bearing, make no noise in neutral at all because it's not turning. So, and then we got some other bearing noises we could have. Let's say we had, remember this one? The counter shaft. Look, we're going to have this vehicle in third. Right here is third, by the way. So we're in third. The power flow is this. It comes in, input shaft. It goes to the, right here at fourth. This is fourth. It drops it down to the counter shaft. Now the counter shaft is carrying the load, moving the power. It's going to go to this gear right here, and then all these gears are turning these other speed gears. But right now, if we're in neutral, they're all just kind of freewheeling, and these individual speed gears are rotating on their own bearings. If we're in third, now this fixed gear is going to drive this gear, which is now locked to the shaft because I just shifted into it. So if we had a counter shaft bearing that was bad, it would probably make noise right now in third. Probably make noise in first, second, third. But if I shift to fourth, remembers what fourth does. Fourth is a little unique.
Or direct drive.
So fourth, now the input shaft, which it's hard to tell, but right here, you see how I can wiggle that shaft? That shaft is not actually connected. It ends right here. But when I shift into fourth, it passes power straight through. So yeah, the counter shaft's still turning, but it's not carrying any load. So the counter shaft will quiet down. Because it's just spinning along for the ride. Now let's just say we were experiencing a noise, right? It didn't seem like it was a pilot bearing. It didn't seem like it was a release bearing. It didn't really seem like it was the input bearing, because you know how to kind of test those. It didn't seem like it was a counter shaft, because it didn't quiet down and forth. And it didn't seem like it was an output shaft, because it doesn't seem to vary that much with vehicle speed, and it doesn't go away in neutral. Now, so if you think about this, what if we had a noise that was very, very loud in second, third, fourth, fifth, but not in first? Think about that for a second. Here's first, by the way. This is first. What is first doing right now? Because first is spinning, but look, the output shaft is not spinning. How is that?
Does it make noise with the counter shaft?
And the counter shaft is spinning, but no load is being transferred right now. And it'd be making noise. I want you to think about, how are all these gears spinning, but the counter shaft not spinning? Do you remember? They're on their own bearings. Remember those needle bearings? So right now, first gear bearing right here would be doing a lot of work, right? But what happens when we shift it first? Remember the customer said, hey, it makes noise in all gears except first. Now what's that bearing doing?
Working.
It's just going along for the ride. So that's the thing. That bearing, the speed gear bearing, matters in every gear except the gear that gear is engaged. So first gear would be quiet at first if it was a bad first gear needle bearing for the action bearing. You want to see the other? I got one. I'll see. I'm gonna bring it to you because I can. Yeah. So this is literally the little needle bearing. They're split needle bearings like this. So I actually didn't get a match set, but they're going to look like this, and they're going to sit inside of the bearing. So that way when that bearing is not selected, it's just going to be freewheeling in there like that. That bearing's doing a lot of work. Then when we sleeve onto this gear, now it turns all together. If this bearing was missing a roller, yeah, it's gone down the drain now. Exactly. It would be probably loud right now. It'd be all chewed up. But when we select first, it would all spin together, so it could be a big wadded up freaking grenade bomb in there, but it'd be turning with the output shaft, so who cares? Because it's locked to the output shaft. Kind of make sense?
Yeah.
You getting confused with noises again?
No.
All right, we want to end it there?
Okay.
All right, we can end it there.